gentlemen, and everybody else of the internet, I give you the Aston Martin Vantage V550.
The story of this car began back in the 1980s when Aston Martin chairman Victor Gauntlet realised that their flagship V8 was in desperate need of an update. Though still reasonably well loved, that car was built on a foundation that dated back to the DBS of the 1960s. Unfortunately, Aston Martin's perennial financial troubles meant that they didn't have the resources to develop an actually all-new car. Instead, they opted for the second best thing: redesign what they had to such an extent it looked like an all-new car. And credit where credit is due, the new Virage, which debuted in 1989, did certainly look like an all-new affair, both outside and in. Gone were the creases, lines and chrome of the old car, which had been with it since the 1970s. In their place was this new, sleeker, more aerodynamic looking body, and inside, though it was still very much a parts bin special, I have to say, having recently spent a lot of time in an old Aston, this definitely feels like a new one. Inside, the most obvious source of donor parts appears to be Ford, with the steering wheel, the windows switches, the mirror controls and the door levers all coming from either Ford or companies that they owned. And part of the reason for that may be the fact that by the time the car reached production, Gauntlet had actually sold his stake in the firm to the Blue Oval. In terms of drivetrain, the car retained the familiar 5.3-litre quad-cam Tadek-Marek designed V8. However, for the Virage, it was gifted with new 4-valve per-cylinder heads designed by Callaway in the United States. This gave it a power figure of some 330 horsepower, which in 1989 was already not really quite enough for a car with a significant price tag. The first solution to this issue was a factory conversion to 6.3 litres, gifting the car another 100 to 150 horsepower. But it was in 1993 when Aston Martin finally got serious and launched this, the Vantage. The engine was reworked, and to the side of it bolted a pair of Eaton TS91 superchargers, bringing the power total from around 330 horsepower to 550. Most impressively though, torque is 555 pound-foot. That's 752 Newton meters. Even today, those are impressive numbers, but 30 years ago, that made this Aston Martin the most powerful production car in the world, bar one, the McLaren F1. 0 to 60 fell from 7 and a bit seconds to 4.5, and top speed climbed to acclaimed 186 miles an hour. For that reason alone, I think, the car's status as an icon was guaranteed. However, there was just one small little issue. You see, though Aston Martin had done a lot to make the production of these cars somewhat more efficient than the old ones, they were still very much handmade cars. By which, I don't mean hand-assembled as many later cars were. No, these cars were crafted by men with English wheels, big hammers and even bigger moustaches. Men almost certainly called Brian, Derek, Steve and Terry. In fact, it was a Terry Durston, who built this car's very engine, and unlike many later ones where they put a badge on simply for final inspection, this means he really did put the entire thing together, and it is a masterpiece. But in spite of efforts to improve factory efficiency, it was still an incredibly labour-intensive way of building a car, with a new Aston Martin taking between 3 and 4 months to assemble. However, you cannot fault their attention to detail. It's worth noting that in the transition from Virage to Vantage, the car got not just an upgrade to its engine, suspension and brakes, but also a complete revision of the styling, which was beefed up significantly. In fact, only the doors and the roof were carried over from the original Virage.
Not too long ago, I had the pleasure, thanks to a good friend called Guy, of living with his 1985 Aston Martin V8 for a week. And though in very many ways I loved that car, it did also have a few big issues. It wasn't really all that fast, and the automatic gearbox was horrendous. It was, unfortunately, just not anywhere near as nice to drive as it was to look at or listen to. This fixes all of that. Even when you're not trying, this engine is an absolute powerhouse. In fact, going around town I have to be careful because it seems to like hold in the RPM at about 2,000, and so with no throttle at all you'll easily do 30 miles an hour or more. The 6-speed Corvette-derived manual gearbox is also an utter delight, far lighter and easier than I expected it to be, and the same really can be said of all the controls. The old V8 was a very physical beast. The steering, despite being power assisted, was incredibly heavy. All of the controls felt like they were set in concrete. This though is the complete opposite. It's a very easy, friendly and approachable car to drive. I could easily see someone doing very big miles in this, as its owner Craig has. He lives abroad most of the year, so for the 2 months that he spends in Britain, this is his daily driver. In fact, he just returned from a road trip around Germany where he took it to 170 miles an hour on the Autobahn. That, I am told, was a very nice experience. Now, unlike many an Aston Martin owner, he's not a man with an unlimited budget. He previously had a Ferrari 550 and a 612, but both had to go to make room for this. And it's a decision he's not regretted. Because though I have big love for both those cars, and so does he, the Aston is a very different character. Where do I begin? Well, I've talked a little bit about the engine, but let's just remind you of how good it is. 3,000 RPM, this thing has ample grunt. The last one frustrated me with its lack of go. This one is impressing me with its grunt. I also have it on good authority that these early cars, though badged and sold as having 550 horsepower, likely had a little bit closer to 600. It might also help that this is an ex-press car, and let's face it, old-fashioned press cars are notorious for being rather healthy when it comes to their power outputs. I'm sure most of you, when looking at a car like this, will almost certainly be thinking of the V600 or the run-out special Le Mans. That's the one with the nostrils at the front. However, there's a couple of things you should know. First off, I do believe that the V600 started life not as a model, but as an upgrade package. So you bought a V550, then you sent it back to Aston Martin for conversion to V600 tune. Later, it could be ordered directly from the factory, but however you had it, it came at a significant cost. For some context, the then brand new Ferrari F355 would have set you back about £90,000. This car, the V550, would have cost you £190,000. The V600, £233,000. Just about the only cars that would have cost you more back in the day would have been a Rolls-Royce Corniche, which cost a nice even $250,000, a number of expensive Bentley Continentals, or a Ferrari F50, which is about £330,000, or the already mentioned McLaren F1, which was about $630,000. Best of all, if you did buy one of these cars later in their production run, which finished up in about 2000, you only got the 12 months of warranty. It was unlimited mileage though, so, you know, there's that. They made just 40 of the last of line Le Mans, but it is worth remembering just how rare all of these cars were. So total Vantage production, including all variants from 1993 to 2000, is 280 cars, of which 40 were the Le Mans, leaving you with 240 cars, of which about half or so were right-hand drives. Many of those were then upgraded or modified, mostly to V600 specification, meaning this, an unmolested as original V550, is a very rare thing indeed. To me, this also has to be one of the classic Aston Martin colour combinations: British racing green over a tan leather and wood interior. It's fabulous. This car was sold by Aston Martin Works, so came with all of the usual things you get by buying with them, including a thorough check over, a service, and in this case, a brand new set of tyres. Though curiously, there are Pirellis at the front and Goodyears at the back, which is very odd considering they're all the same size. 285 wide with 45 profile and an 18-inch wheel diameter. They're massive, absolutely huge. However, they do help give you just a little bit of confidence when you're pushing on through a bend. I do think I gave this car's owner, Craig, a little bit of a fright earlier because it was very clear to me he was being somewhat ginger with the car. Having spent some time recently with an older Aston Martin, I felt reasonably confident in its ability to go round a corner, and I'm not sure he had the same faith in it that I did. In any case, driving one of these at speed does require a great deal of respect because it does still have oodles of torque and just about nothing in the way of driver aids. There's probably ABS, that's about it. There is also airbags, and I believe this was the first Aston Martin so equipped. There are also catalytic converters, though this car has its original factory sports exhaust. And doesn't it sound good? Despite the fact there's a pair of them, I'm surprised there's not really all that much in the way of supercharger whine coming through. You do have a little gauge here at the top of the dash telling you how much those superchargers are contributing, though when they're not required, they are actually disconnected, on account of the fact it takes 40 horsepower to actually drive each of them. So around town, they'd be taking far more than they'd be giving. The one word that really describes how you need to drive this car is smooth. Yes, it's powerful. Yes, it's fast. But it's also a GT car built in the 1990s based on a platform that could trace its roots back to the 1960s. There is double wishbone suspension at the front, but there's also a Dion rear axle with a Watts linkage at the back. It's not advanced. A Ferrari 550 would run rings round it, to say nothing of what the Japanese were making at the time. The lightness of the steering is maybe the only thing I don't really like, because in a bend it just doesn't give me the same level of confidence that I had with the old car, that I was either near or not the car's limits. However, I've now put it through a few bends to know that provided conditions are good, it certainly isn't going to bite you. It is though a car that certainly benefits from a slow in, fast out approach.
The other area you notice the age of the chassis is in the body control. It's improved over the old V8, but you still constantly feel bumps in the road, which in a Ferrari 550 would be much better controlled.
It's also a very broad car, meaning that for sections like this where the road narrows, you really do need to pay attention. Luckily, it seems that just about everybody loves an Aston, so when you do need a little bit more room, people seem very happy to give it to you.
Also helpful is the car's excellent visibility, with unintrusive B-pillars and glass that seems to go all the way back to the boot, a bit like a Mark I Focus. In fact, the Aston even comes with a very Ford-like heated screen for extra year-round visibility, not that many of them likely ever saw a hard winter.
This thing really is so different to what I expected. It's maybe not quite as fast as I thought. Yeah, it's got lots of power, but it is still 2 tons. However, it's not slow. But I did figure it was going to be a difficult drive. Having had such a time with the last one where everything was so heavy, I thought this was just going to be more of the same. No, the power steering works. The brake servo works. Even more amazingly, the aircon works. It's beautiful. It really does feel like a car that is 20 years newer than the old V8. which is not to say that it's immune from some old school Aston Martin quirks. First off, the oil pressure gauge down here, unless you're absolutely stationary, just does that all the time. The handbrake down here is still a kind of fly-off arrangement, despite the fact that it's next to you, so I don't think it's quite a fly-off, but you press the button in to engage it, then you just lift it up to get it off. The switch gear feels very, very much haphazard, particularly all the controls for the seat, which are on the seat, and so if you're a larger gentleman, there is a possibility you just sort of start adjusting them as you went along. This is a tradition Aston Martin kept with the new Vantage as well. You've also still got 2 releases down here for the 2 fuel filler flaps, and when you open the bonnet, it is near impossible to pull the lever back and lift it up the required amount without being in exactly the right place. From in here, the car also feels like it's shrunk somewhat compared to its predecessor. That I would have called a just about genuine 4-seater, but this really is a 2+2, maybe even a 2+1 while I'm driving it, and I got short legs. In fact, Guy, who owns the V8, said that he looked at one of these but discounted it because he couldn't fit. The wing mirrors are of an old Citroen. The clock round here, when you adjust it, both hands move at the same time, and to fix that is 1,500 quid. And the car does have, for some reason, 6 headlights, which, when the car was facelifted in about 1996, retained the 6 layout, but with circles instead of squares. None of that, though, would be even close to enough to put me off wanting one of these cars. And though I absolutely loved my time with the V8, if I had to live with an old Aston Martin, it would be this. It's just so much easier, so much nicer, and it goes. It does still drink, as you might imagine. Apparently it's about £50 an hour to keep it running, but the boot's a good size, so you can take it abroad. However, you do feel like you're getting something for the shares you've bought in Shell. Put your foot down and it moves in the way that you've always been told old Astons do. This is a proper car. You can even heel and tow nicely. The brakes are actually pretty good. They generate an ungodly amount of dust. Oh, yes! I like it. And it's also one of those cars where, yes, you can have fun, yes, you can press on, you've got to be very careful with the way you put it through a bend, but because of what it is, because of the Aston-ness, you know, the whole herd that's given its life to decorate the interior, and that glorious sound coming out the back, you get, I think, just as much enjoyment from just poodling along, window down, going around town at 20 miles an hour, as you do when you're out on the open road and you do this. A couple of years ago, I was actually kind of tempted to look at one of these because they're also one of the best value Astons of their type. To get yourself into a 1980s Vantage, you could be paying £300,000 to £400,000. This, the later V550, more modern, inside and out, though I'll grant you, the old one does just look a lot better, but which is far easier to drive and I'm sure quite a bit quicker. These are about half the price. So these you can pick up at anywhere from £150,000 to £250,000, depending on the mileage, the specification, with loads of really good examples out there at 170 grand. Yes, the V600s, the Le Mans, they'll command more. But I don't think you need it at all. Like I said, they're a super rare car. The chances of turning up to the golf club and finding out someone else has got the same thing or a slightly better one, pretty slim. And I struggle to think of anybody who wouldn't just fall in love with this. I like this a lot, a hell of a lot. In fact, It might be my new favourite Aston. Do I like it that much? Yes, I think I do. Oh no, a tractor. I'm going to have to slow down. And now I've got to speed up again. Wow. Oh, don't do that in the wet. Apparently that's a very, very bad idea. But in the dry, I get away with it. Now, before you head off to Car and Classic or Auto Trader in search of a Vantage, a couple of warnings. First off, though I know plenty of people who've owned these cars and haven't had big issues, like an old Ferrari, they are still very capable of throwing big bills at you. Regular servicing can be in the thousands, and finding parts can be tricky due to the low volume run and hand-made nature of the car. You should also be aware that the transition from the shape of the Virage to the Vantage was so popular that in 1996 the Virage was discontinued and replaced with a car simply known as the V8 Coupe. Visually, it looks almost identical to the Vantage, but it lacks the superchargers and other performance upgrades. For this reason, I highly suggest buying any of these cars from a known specialist, like Nicholas Me, who have very kindly allowed the use of their footage once again in this video. Anyway, I want to say a huge thank you to Craig for bringing his car out, and as ever, to you for watching. If you've got a classic or otherwise Aston Martin that's interesting and you'd like to see it on the channel, please do get in touch. My email address is in the description of every single video. But to everybody else, I want to say simply a huge, great big thank you, and if things have gone as I hope they have, by the time this video goes out, we'll be on 300,000 subscribers, and you know, I can't think of a better way to celebrate. So yet again, let me say thank you, hit that like button, comment down below. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? You made it to the end of a video. Hit that button, please. It costs you nothing, and it changes my life. I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.